And to discuss this and so much more on the Rich Eisen Show, our friend from Pardon the Interruption, ESPN, of course, his long days with the Washington Post. Michael Wilbon back here. How are you, Michael?
It's been a rough morning, Rich. Rough morning for those of us who seem to go from everybody's going from one unfortunate thing to another. But this is particularly sad. While not surprising, for those of us who knew Coach Thompson and knew he was struggling, had some health challenges, not a surprise, but sad nonetheless.
Well, then I greatly appreciate you taking the time on this day, this very morning, to share with us your memories of John Thompson and what we should remember him for. You're the perfect person to set the stage and set our mindset properly, Michael.
Well, you know what, Rich, it's interesting because much of what is going to be said about John Thompson in the next few days, the context of it will be basketball, just like you had, and that is the arena in which he operated. I mean, literally and figuratively, because you can go from before Patrick Ewing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, John Thompson got to the Elite Eight before he ever recruited Patrick Ewing, and then of course he got to 3 Final Fours, lost 2 of the memorable championship games of all time, won one by going through Akeem Olajuwon in Houston and on down through the Allen Iverson episode. That was at the end of John's coaching career. That was he retired in 1999. Iverson left in 1996. So that's the end of the framing of it. For those of us who were around for much more than that and longer than that, so many things come to mind. I mean, he's the most fascinating, complex person I certainly ever covered, maybe ever met. And I was 21 years old when I got to the Washington Post and was assigned to cover Georgetown basketball, which was not a big deal yet nationally. It was locally. And when I first started covering the team, John wouldn't speak to me. He would not talk to me. And I laugh about it now. I've laughed about it for decades because it was part of John's, initiation, rite of passage. He would call each the writers he knew. So he would call Kornheiser and John Feinstein or Dave Kendrick, and he would say, "Who is this Wilbon? Who is this kid from Chicago? Who the hell is he? Why should I talk to him?"
Right.
And then 5 years later, he'd call me and say, "Who is this Mike Freeman? Who is this David Aldridge? Why the hell? Who's this J.A. Adonde? I'm not talking to him."
Nice.
And all of us became so impacted. So 5 years, to shorten this a little bit, 5 years after I got that treatment, my father died at the age of 60. My father passed away, lung cancer. It was on March 11th, so it's right in March Madness. I was covering the team, covering Georgetown. I didn't call anybody. I found out my father died, which was expected. I rush home. I fly home. I walk into my parents' kitchen. My mother's on the phone, and she's on the phone what seems to me to be a long time, considering we had stuff to do. We had affairs to tend to. She finally got off the phone, and I said, why are you on the phone so long? Who was that? She said, I was talking to Coach Thompson.
Wow.
And I said, what was that about? She said, I'm not telling you what it was about. We had a great conversation, and I go down to the funeral home, and in the funeral home already, and mind you, I had not called John or anybody at Georgetown. I got on a plane, and I flew home. I get to the funeral home. The minute I get out, I leave my parents' house after I get to O'Hare. There's an enormous wreath of flowers, and it says from John Thompson. And then there's another enormous wreath of flowers, and it says from Georgetown basketball, as if they aren't one and the same. And everybody in Washington has stories about Big John. And I think of them even as I'm talking. Mark Asher, who covered the team for a long time. And Mark was a character, to say the least. He was an interesting character. Most of the people on the Post, at times we just found him so annoying we couldn't deal with him, even though we loved him. Well, he had a kidney transplant, and John Thompson sat in his hospital room overnight.
No kidding.
And, again, people would say, well, John hated the media. John hated this. He was the most paranoia.
Right.
All these things, these phrases coined. And yet you had all these other things going on. And all of them could be true at some point, by the way. I mean, if you talk to Jackie McMullen, she's going to have a Big John story or 5. I'll tell you one other quick one.
Sure.
One morning he called me at 7:00 in the morning and said, "Hey, get down here." I said, "Coach, what are you doing?" He said, "Just get down here." So I go down. He's sitting in a sedan in the front parking lot. And I said, "Coach," he said, "Get in." I said, "Coach, what are we doing?" We were going to look for a guy named Rayful Edmond. You can Google Rayful Edmond. What you're going to find essentially is he was a drug lord, a drug kingpin. And he was trying to get at young kids in Washington who included a freshman, maybe a sophomore, but I think a freshman named Alonzo Mourning.
Mm.
And Big John, in a way that, you can't even think about people doing this. He just put it out there. You need to come see me. You're not getting at any of my kids. You're not getting any kids I can protect, but you need to come see me. And because he didn't go see him immediately, John went looking for him. We went looking for him in John's sedan.
Come on.
Big John's sedan. We're looking at barbershops. We're at churches. I mean, we're everywhere in D.C. and Northeast and Southeast, probably in Northwest. We're everywhere we can go and look for him. We couldn't find him. But I remember sitting in the car thinking, I didn't have the nerve to ask, John, if we find him, what are we doing if we find him?
Right.
And this is the length he would go to protect people that mattered to him, which was a lot of people. And like I said, I have dozens of those stories, personal, professional, about what he meant. And you know what, Rich? Not all that many of them are about basketball. Some of them are. They're tangentially related to Proposition 48 and 42 and the lengths he would go to say this is wrong, to the lengths he would stand up to the NCAA, to school administrators, the people he thought were taking advantage of their position in life. I was around for all those games. I was the beat writer covering the Villanova game. I was covering the Michael Jordan game. I covered the Akeem Patrick game, all the Chris Mullin games, the games in the Big East that built the Big East. I covered all that stuff, and yet the stories I think of, they involve basketball, but some of them don't. Some of them, a lot of them, most of them don't. I was talking to Kornheiser this morning. Our stories, they wind up being personal, very personal stories about Big John and who he was to his core. I mean, much of what I believe about education and athletics comes from, I was shaped 40 years of knowing him. He didn't have one and dones unless they transferred out because they couldn't take it. Because he was a demanding man. He was commanding and demanding. People think they know about tough love and all. They don't know anything about that. Most of today's players who are one and dones and in and out of schools, and they're just there to be, roasted and toasted, and they head out. They couldn't play for John Thompson. They couldn't have signed a letter of intent. So much of what matters to me today in his passing, the reflection, they have nothing to do with basketball, even though that's the venue. That's the context in which we view his life. Trust me. The people who were around him the longest know that there was so much more than that.
Michael Wilbon here on the Rich Eisen Show. I don't even know how the hell to follow up on that, Michael. I mean, that was so beautiful and comprehensive and engrossing and moving and wonderful and saddening all at once. Like, it's dreadful. This is a pandemic. This man deserves a huge memorial, memorial.
Well, that's what probably saddens me most. So there are three people who have, more than three, but there three men have died in Washington life during the pandemic, and none of the three were able to be sent off properly. Wes Unseld, Bobby Mitchell, and John Thompson. Three Hall of Fame people in terms of the arena of sports. John, multiple Halls of Fame, but certainly the Basketball Hall of Fame. Bobby Mitchell, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, a historic figure in Washington, the first black Redskin, and I'm using that term advisedly. And Wes Unseld. And three enormous figures. And I other than my father, I think as an adult man, John Thompson, maybe in a couple of uncles, John Thompson had more influence than anybody else in my personal life. And with Bobby Mitchell and Wes Unseld, that's a large percentage of my work life, just of my life, covering basketball and football in Washington, D.C. for 30 years, from 1980 to 2010, when I left to come to the network full time. But Big John, it's just, it's just remarkable, sort of who he was, the voice, the size. People used to be so afraid of it. I would laugh, and he would say, "Shut up! You're gonna give me away. Don't tell people I'm a nice guy. That's a pushover. Don't tell anybody I'm a softie. Ruin my reputation." He ran into my then girlfriend, and she went to Virginia and Duke Law School, and they met. And he said, "Young lady, come over. Let me talk to you. You clearly have academic credentials. You are too smart to be involved with this fool." And my wife got the biggest kick out of it. We talked about it. I texted her this morning. She was on a plane not too long ago when she went up and Big John insisted on talking to my son, and just sort of, getting to see, who he was. And I had taken him and I had introduced him to him one more time. And I don't even know, how am I going to tell my son who Big John is, who he was? And it's, like I said, we're all, everybody nationally, he's a great basketball coach. Yes, he put out a brand which redefined college basketball. I'm not trying to minimize what he did as a coach. He redefined it. His defense, go look at any tape of the way defense was played, even by John Wooden's UCLA teams in the 1970s, and look at the way it was played after 1978. John's teams, pre-Patrick, both Sleepy Floyd, Craig Shelton, John Duran, guys who played in the NBA. But go look at it after that. Go look at it with Patrick Ewing.
You could make the case, Michael. Michael, you could make the case that the way that you could make the case that the way that the NBA started playing in the late '80s, that we just saw in The Last Dance, that Georgetown presaged that sort of put you on your ass type defense, the physical nature. You could say that Georgetown ushered in
that documentary, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yes,
Rich. That documentary sort of spells it out, and the pro guys, you're so right. They were so proud of it. I remember when John was coaching the Olympic team, and one of the games leading up to it was played in Charlotte, and that Charlotte team was like an ACC select team, and on it specifically were Michael Jordan, Muggsy Bogues, and Spud Webb. And Big John said to Michael at one point, "Hey, I want you to press our guys. I want you to press our guys, trap them, put real defense on them." And Big John and Michael said, "No, coach, you don't want us to do that, because we're going to play it the way you play it, with our level of skill and talent." And it was funny because whoever was on that Olympic team at the time, the pre-Olympic, the Olympic team, they couldn't even get the ball across half court. And Jordan loved that. That was sort of testimony to Big John and the way he taught defense, but applied by pros, real pros, in real time. Even though it was a summer and they hadn't practiced and it was an exhibition and all that, yes, that defense conveyed, and that intensity conveyed. And, so there's a ton of basketball stuff, but there's the far, far, far better stuff, Rich. Trust me, if you read anything by anybody, Tom Boswell of the Washington Post will write, I know, the best possible obituary, because he covered John in high school. He covered Big John, his high school teams. And but Tom Boswell, I'm just telling people in advance, if you want to read something, go to WashingtonPost.com tomorrow, if not tonight, and read whatever Tom Boswell writes about Big John. And it will be something that you remember reading for the rest of your life.
Michael, thanks for the time. Again, it's such a treasure to hear you talk about a man that meant so much to you, and it's a treasure for me that you do it on the day of this man's passing. It's something I do not take lightly. I greatly appreciate it. I love you, and let's talk soon about everything else going on in the sports world.
Rich, love you as well. Thank you for having me. It is a difficult Dave, it's probably good, like in a funereal way, to talk about it, and that's what so many of us will do. Elaine Eightman, David Aldridge, and Jay Adonde, and people that you have known all your career. That's what we've started doing today, and some of those people have passed away. Stuart Scott, Brian Burwell, Ralph Wiley. I mean, we were all in a fraternity where you had to earn. You had to earn time, respect, attention, interviews. You had to earn it, and there was no easy way through it. There was no grading on the curve, and so that's what all of us are doing today. And like I said, it's a particularly sad day, but thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Right back at you. Best to Tony and everybody else, Michael. Let's chat soon. Thanks again.
Thank you, Rich.
You bet. That's Michael Wilbon. I'm definitely watching Pardon the Interruption later. That's for darn sure.